as I say, from my point of view, I have no way of knowing whether what is written in the Bible is true, is made up, or has been edited, for other people's benefits. So how would I know that what's written in the Bible is true accounts?
Great question. Let me make an introductory statement, and then let me direct myself specifically to the New Testament verses we're talking about. I don't mean which verses, but why they're important. If you look at ancient events and ancient people who lived, and people who we never question their historicity, people would be surprised to learn that although works were written in Alexander the Great's lifetime by eyewitnesses and some of his officers, we don't have them. We may find those works at a monastery someday where a lot of things have been kept, but we don't have them now. The earliest biography we have of Alexander is just short of 300 years after he died. And somebody might say, okay, well, good for you. And that's true of Hannibal, where the earliest sources for Hannibal, I understand. I'm not a scholar in that area, but I understand. I just read yesterday, this earliest sources for Hannibal are decades after he wrote, and with so many other people. Now, someone could say, okay, good. But they're not religious, and you're asking me to commit my life to them. Well, okay. I'm not trying to put anybody down, but on another part of my shelf over here, I've got a book by a Buddhist scholar, a PhD, non-Christian, Buddhist scholar, and he starts out on page 1 of his book, and here's how I'm paraphrasing, but here's what he says. A British university professor, by the way, but he says, we don't have what Christians have. Here's how he starts. They have the words of their Lord. We don't, meaning Lord Buddha. We don't have that. They have the words of those who studied under him and those who studied under those. Yeah. We don't have any of that. They have material within a few decades. We don't have that. In fact, he said, for the record, I'm letting you know, he's an editor. He said, well, I'm letting you know the sources on Buddhism that I'm repeating in this book are generally 600 to 800 years after the Buddha died. That's double the distance of Alexander. So in general, a person could theoretically say, I've got some good material here in the New Testament. In fact, the leading theory right now was the University of London scholar about 30 years ago who did his doctoral dissertation. This view's been probably the majority view today among skeptical New Testaments and others, that the Gospels are basically Greco-Roman bios, Greco-Roman biography. They're biographies. Now, that doesn't mean they're true, but they're just saying, that's a general comment, we're on decent grounds. Okay, now the specific comment. Let me go to Bart Ehrman, who in our country, North America, but really around Europe and North America, is the best known skeptical scholar in the world. He's an atheist New Testament scholar. Be very fair, nice guy, I'll add. Very fair, but very firm when you don't have data. Mm-hmm. And he wrote a book, Did Jesus Exist? And he's argued against the mythicists who said Jesus never exists. He said it's totally a joke, and he goes after him. That's another question. But he answers this question. He says, I quote a lot of gospel, mostly verses in the Gospels, Acts, and Paul's epistles, which they accept. The most ardent skeptics accept 7 of the 13 Pauline books. You can use them. That doesn't mean they're inspired. That doesn't mean he's always right, but you can use them because he's a good research. He's a good, close enough to the data. Mm-hmm. Bart Ehrman says, why do I quote New Testament verses all the time? Because I believe it's inspired? He said, not in your life. Oh, so it's because I think they're reliable. No way. I don't think it's reliable. All right, duh. Then why do you quote the verses? He goes, look, I'm a New Testament specialist. And he says, I quote those verses because as a specialist, I know which verses are backed up by data and which ones aren't. And if I can get a source, for example, the crucifixion of Jesus, just one example, he produces 15 independent sources for the crucifixion of Jesus, and a number of them are not in the New Testament. And of those who aren't in the New Testament, a number of those are Christian and a number of them are not Christian. So he goes, That's what I mean by evidence, and that's why I quote verses, not because, and you can kind of see him making fun of it. It's a book, but not because they're in the Bible, because that's what people say. So I do the same thing he does. I will be pleased to use his verses. I'd be pleased to use his text. So that's my argument when I make for the resurrection, which I can develop if you want. But when I make the argument for the resurrection, I will take an initial list of about a dozen or to 15 facts, and just arbitrarily, because nobody only gives me those 15. Even the strongest skeptics will give you more than that. But I'll take 15, a dozen. I shorten the list to a half dozen. I've even done it before with 4. And my point is, everybody, got to be a specialist scholar. I don't care where you're coming from, though, or what you believe. They will give me these 6 facts. And I say, on the basis of these 6 facts, the resurrection is, I think, by far, but the resurrection is certainly the best explanation for those 6 facts that all these specialists concede. By the way, I use Bart Ehrman. Another one is Gerhard Ludemann, the atheist German New Testament scholar, who said that he doesn't believe in the resurrection. And he said, the resurrection, Jesus died on the cross. He said it's an absolutely solid historical event, like Ehrman says. No scholars go after it. And he says, what something happened later. And he said, I'll tell you something about this something. Whatever it was, he says it was reported immediately, not 50 years later. Yeah, it's reported 50 years later, but it's not only, the earliest ones are immediate. Immediate, says Ludemann, and immediate, says Ehrman. And immediate says another, I'll throw a British scholar in there. He just passed away, unfortunately, but James D.G. Dunn of Durham, University of Durham, one of your better schools. He says probably the same year Jesus died, it was proclaimed by those who were witnesses. So we're talking very early, people who were there, verses that stand up to atheist specialists' investigation, and the critic is free to disagree, but they should have some reasons why they disagree.